What if you could help others to find the power to heal themselves? Physically, emotionally, and spiritually.
When I started teaching my classes, it was in 2002, and I was just doing the past life regressions and contacting the subconscious part. But then as the time went on and we found how powerful this was and what we could do with it, a lot of the students began saying, you know, advanced past life regression doesn't really tell what it's all about. This is so much more than that. We think you should change the name. So it was a few years ago we decided to change the name to Quantum Healing Hypnosis Technique. And this is the healing technique that we've now been teaching it, well, since 2002, that's 12 years.
What if you could time travel with them? Visit mythical places or angelic realms, other worlds, other galaxies. Help others to speak to their higher selves. You can. Dolores has taught thousands of people from across the world how to use QHHT, and now you can learn her method by going directly to dolorescannon.com. And don't forget to mention the discount code MORETALKS. Hi guys, and welcome back to another episode of the Kevin Moore Show. Now on today's show, I'm about to be joined by my guest, Philip Mantle, and he's going to discuss his latest book, ROSWELL ALIEN AUTOPSY, the truth behind the film that shocked the world. Now it contains much of a revised edition of over 600 pages of information, newspaper cuttings, original letters, faxes, plus interview transcripts, and much more. Now, much of this original material has never been published before, and the ROSWELL ALIEN AUTOPSY is the definitive book on the so-called alien autopsy film, which is the most controversial piece of film in the entire history of UFO research. Now, released to the public in 1995 on TV, video, and via newspaper and magazines, this film has been debated quite literally around the world. ROSWELL ALIEN AUTOPSY is the first and only book dedicated to deal with the film in its entirety. Philip Mantle, thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, my pleasure, Kevin. The pleasure's all mine, I can assure you.
Oh, no, it's so good to have you on, Philip. You've been a great support for the UFO community for many years, and you're producing some fantastic work in the sense of published material right now, and you've also been very helpful to me to get particular guests on as well, so I just want to thank you for that as well. How long have you been in this particular field for?
So many years. No, I'm 62 now, so I actually started when I was 21, so it's just over 40 years. So, I started as a relatively young man, very naive, green around the edges, but here I am all those years later.
Yeah, and you've got your own publishing company now?
Yes, I started Flying Disc Press in 2015, right at the end of 2015, and I retired from my day job a couple of years back, so I run that full time as well as writing and research as well. So, it keeps me out from under the wife's feet, if nothing else, Kevin.
Absolutely, it does. Well, we're linking your websites and everything in the description below. So, okay, this is an interview that's mainly going to focus around the ROSWELL ALIEN AUTOPSY. Now, just tell us your history of this in a sense of when did you first get involved and how did you first get involved in this?
Yeah, well, it goes back to 1993. At that moment in time, amongst other things, I was the press officer for BUFORA, the British UFO Research Association. And a letter crossed my desk from a company called the Merlin Group, signed by Santilli, basically asking if BUFORA could assist with the making of a general UFO documentary. There was no specifics, just a UFO documentary. So I replied the old-fashioned way. I wrote back, sent some details about the association, and outlined what we could and couldn't do. So we, a bit of correspondence crossed our desks and a couple of faxes. And then I began to speak to Ray Santilli, and it was still a general UFO documentary we were talking about. And I pitched some ideas to him as well. And then out of the blue, Kevin, he changed tack completely. And he said, well, actually, Philip, this will have probably spanned over now into 1994. No, it was still in 93, I beg your pardon. And he said, well, actually, I have film of the UFO crash at Roswell. And he didn't call it Roswell. He mispronounced it. He actually called it Roswell. And I've got the creatures being dissected. So I said, great story, Ray, marvelous. Show me the film. So, yes, I can. No, I can't. Yes, I can. No, I can't. This went backwards and forwards. Later on in 1993, the movie Fire in the Sky came out, the Travis Walton story. And I was hired by the production company to help promote it. So one of the things I did, Travis Walton and Mike Rogers were in London, and I set up a speaking engagement one evening for them and a press conference afterwards. Now, this speaking engagement was very close to where Ray Santilli's office was, so I invited him along. So he came. That's the first time I met him. He went on to tell me this fantastic story about meeting this mysterious former military cameraman, paying cash for the footage and not being allowed to mention his name and so on. So my question remained the same. Well, can you show me it? Yes, I can. No, I can't. So in the end, I told him to get lost. It's just another fancy story. So time passed. We come to the early part now of 1995, and a movie was sent to me for review. It was called Roswell. It was released by Sony, and Paul Davies was the producer. Cal MacLachlan was the main guy in it, and it kind of, I thought, I wonder if that Santilli guy still claims to have this Roswell footage. I'd got his business card, so I took it out of my folder, rang him. And he says, yeah, I do, Philip, but you don't believe me. I said, well, I can't believe you until you show me the damn thing. So he says, I'll tell you what, make an appointment with my secretary and come on down and I'll show you. So my wife and I traveled to London. I live in the north of England. And he showed us a piece of film that he called the tent footage. This was the creatures being examined on site before they were shipped off to wherever. So at least we could confirm, film actually existed. It wasn't great quality, it's a creature on a slab, two men behind it in white coats. Over the next few weeks, he showed us 2 different autopsy films and some debris film. So I said to Ray, what is your intention? What you're going to do with this film? And he said, well, I'm going to make my own documentary and I'm going to release it on home video. So you'll go to your local Blockbuster or Woolworths or wherever it is you buy your VHS in those days, and you'll buy it, or you can buy it directly from me. So I thought, we really need to get this out into the public domain. So I was also at this time Bufora's conference organizer. Already had a conference already planned, already set up for August of 1995 at Hallam University in Sheffield. So just out of the blue, I said, will you show the film at our conference? To my amazement, Ray said, yes, so long as you'll help me investigate it. So we shook hands. There was no contract, no money involved. And that's exactly what happened. A lot of things happened in the meantime, but come, August the 27th, 1995, Ray Santilli turned up, showed the film to a packed house. And then the following day, which was August the 28th, it went out on television around the world. So we've just gone past the 25th anniversary. And that's how it all began, really, Kevin,
Okay, so the tent footage that you saw with your wife and the debris footage, obviously that's not the footage of the alien autopsy. When he contacted you, Ray went to the Sheffield event, he must have had the alien autopsy footage then.
Yeah, he showed us, like I said, the temp footage were the first, but then he went on to show us 2 different autopsy films, one of which everybody has seen on television or online, and that's the one that he showed in Sheffield in August 1995.
Right, okay. And when he initially contacted you through his company back in the day of 95, the Merlin company, what kind of documentary did he want you guys to be involved with at that time, with Bufora?
Well, when I started to speak to him on the phone, he was looking to see if we had any stills that could be used, still photographs, or if we had, video clips that we could license to him of UFO sightings and that kind of thing. We didn't, that wasn't available to us, but I knew a couple of people or a couple of companies that did have such material available, so I put him in touch with them. So there was no specific detail. He was looking to see how we could help him in that respect. So, like I say, and I pitched a few details back to him. Obviously, they didn't make it, but it was so, we're just pitching some ideas backwards and forwards, really.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't know, is Bufora still around in the UK?
It's still going. It's a lot different to what it was in those days, but it's still there. Yes.
Yeah. So what's it stand for? It's the
British UFO Research Association.
You used to work for at the time you were working for them, or?
Yeah, I was. I was, like I said, in 1993 when I was first contacted, I was the press officer. I then became director of investigations. I was also their conference organizer. So I wore a number of hats for them.
Did you feel betrayed when the truth came out about the alien autopsy? In a sense, I mean, you must have built the truth up to yourself over a while, knowing which we're going to get into. But I mean, just as a sort of stab in the dark question, there, did you feel betrayed by it all?
No, not at all. I mean, no, didn't feel betrayed. I felt relieved because I'd been pursuing it. And, the easiest thing in the world, Kevin, is to just say, oh, that's a fake. It don't matter what it is, it's just say it's a fake. But to actually go on and prove that sometimes is much more difficult. And, I was when it all came out and money became involved, I was accused of all kinds of things. I was accused of being a Santilli's accomplice, being on his payroll. That stemmed, I'll tell you how that came about. My wife and I had a young family at the time, and we were having an extension built on our house. So people were saying, well, where does Philip Mantle get his money from? He hasn't got that kind of money. Well, they were right. I didn't, but my wife did. She'd had her own property before we'd met. She'd sold that, and we used some of the money from that to build the extension on our house. Nothing to do with Ray Santilli or anyone else for that matter. So I it became personal, Kevin. So I thought I'm going to stick at this. And I thought, I'm sure we'll get the answers before too long. But, how wrong was I?
Absolutely. And I think nowadays there's a lot more people looking into fantastic claims of particular whistleblowers, as people want the truth. They want discernment from the people who put these whistleblowers on their platforms. But even when you give the people the facts, they've invested so much time into the lives of these particular individuals that there's also a sort of emotional attachment to their story. For people like yourself trying to find the facts, it can become, very personal.
Yeah, I mean, so it became very personal. And the idiots who made these accusations, of course, when the facts became available, never retracted them. And they still get often repeated today. I want to make it quite clear. Ray Santilli did go on to make his own documentary, and he sold it, via mail order. And I actually worked on that for him. It's narrated by Brian Blessed, well-known actor here in the UK, and I wrote it all. I helped him obtain various things for it, interviews and so on. And I was paid a small fee for working on that documentary, like I would if you asked me to work on a documentary, or the BBC did, or whoever, I've just filmed my part in a documentary down in London last week, and they paid me a fee for it. So it was no different. But
What
that was
documentary was
it.
that though? What documentary was that?
It's called Roswell: The Footage, and it is Santilli's own production. You could only buy it direct from him, mail order. And it's, like I said, it's narrated by Brian Blessed. There's some archive footage in it. Then you see the autopsy film, and there's some interviews with various Roswell witnesses. I think he licensed them from another researcher. So that was it. That's what I worked on for him.
Did you know at the time when you was doing that documentary that it had been faked, or?
Not at all. No, this was very early on, right at the very beginning.
Right. Well, let's get into this then. So the story is, right, as far as I can see it, is that, and you can correct us here, please do, right, that Ray had gone to America to look for rare Elvis footage.
This is one of the few true parts about the whole story. He was actually in Cleveland, Ohio in 1992. The reason we know that is because at some point when he returned, he actually did an article, I think it was for either the Daily Mirror or the Sunday Mirror, talking about some of the memorabilia he'd obtained on his trip. And I think the headline was something like, Elvis, his last letters, or something that along that. And Ray had obtained what was allegedly some of the last correspondence ever written by the late Elvis Presley. Ray's business was music. He also collected photographs and memorabilia, and he would license them to publishers, TV, wherever.
Can I just add another name in here as well, which is Gary?
Gary Shoefield.
Yes.
Yeah, Gary Shoefield, was Ray's best friend, I believe, but also his business partner, and still is. So Gary was also out in Cleveland, Ohio in 1992 with them. And this is where Ray claimed he met this elderly gentleman, bought a rare piece of Elvis footage from him, which turned out not to be true. He actually bought it from him, but someone else. Then the old boy came back and said, well, if you think that's good, before I was a freelance cameraman, I used to work for the military. And in 1947, I filmed a UFO crash at Roswell, and I've still got some of it. Are you interested? But what is interesting about the newspaper article is that he talks about some of the memorabilia that he'd bought on that trip. But curiously enough, there's no mention of any rare Elvis footage. That only cropped up, later on in the story. But he was in Cleveland, Ohio in 1992. We're pretty certain of that.
And this is the story that Ray and Gary obviously stick by, for how they came across the footage. Now,
yes,
I believe that Gary stayed in Cleveland while Ray traveled to Florida to go see this footage, and obviously the cameraman wanted an obscene amount of money for what was back in the day, I believe it was over $100,000 that he wanted for this. And it was when Ray eventually got back to the UK, and I think it was a year later on that he eventually acquired this footage. So we're sort of skipping forward now to that he's had this footage.
That's his claim. Yes,
that's his claim. Yeah, and Gary's claim is that he was with Ray in the UK when Ray was looking at the canisters, many canisters of film footage, and in front of their eyes it started to oxidize, and they had to send this to a restoration or some sort of film production company, to try to get off any of the remaining footage on the canisters. And is it right that there was, for the alien autopsy footage, only a minute and a half left of the original reel?
Yeah, well,
footage?
that's the revised story. The original story is, of course, is what you see is what they had, and in between Ray contacting me and it going out on television, he had a private screening at the London Museum on May the 5th, 1995. Now, bearing in mind, I'd seen the tent footage. Ray actually even gave me a copy of that on VHS, which I still have. Myself and a number of colleagues had seen two different autopsy films. Same creature, same room, same people, although one creature had a damaged leg, the other was fully intact. And we'd seen this debris, these panels and these big I-beams. So when we attended the May the 5th screening, we're expecting to see all of this be rolled out. There's an audience of media and UFO researchers. And of course, we just saw one autopsy film and we thought, well, what's happened to the rest? Oh, maybe he's saving it for his documentary. So when the documentary that I worked on came out, no, it's not on there either. It's just the one autopsy film. And when it came out on television, no, it's not there either. There was the one autopsy film where the creature has a big hole in its leg and some of the debris, but none of the other stuff. So we were curious as what had happened. But Ray was adamant. What you see was what he retrieved. And bearing in mind, he also released what he claimed were the boxes. So you have the film. The film's in a canister. The canister's in a box. Over the box has some sticky labels detailing what's in it. So the box has been laid out flat and photocopied, But I remember, and I have a photograph of it, being in Ray Santilli's office, and the alleged films are all stuck in a box, a cardboard box behind his desk, and they're not in any boxes. There's no labels or anything, And I have a photo of that. So, and then later on, of course, we found out quite by chance that Ray had claimed to have got an interview with his cameraman, and that went out on Japanese television, and Japanese television only, wasn't seen anywhere else. But both him and Gary Schofield have now admitted that was indeed a fake. Even Gary on a recent interview he did the back end of last year said, no, it was a fake, and laughs about it, thinks it's funny.
The faking of the cameraman that they found as a homeless man in Los Angeles somewhere.
They went to Los Angeles, got a guy off the street, cleaned him up a bit, turned the lights down low and said, here, just read these out.
And I suppose the thing is here, isn't it? If someone's going to fake something like that on such a big scale like that, then what's to say what else was faked? You know what I mean? Because obviously Gary's sticking to the story that, no, there's a minute and a half's worth in the original Alien Autopsy movie mixed in with recreation footage of what Ray originally saw at the
Well, we see the story.
Yeah.
The story changed. So Ray's saying, this is the footage. I've sold it to Fox. I've sold it around the world. Then we move forward in time again. We get up to around 2006, and Ray and Gary have signed to do the movie Alien Autopsy, starring Anton Deck.
That's right, UK.
And of course, it's in the run up to that is when they changed their story. Well, I'm sorry, but the film was pretty damaged, and we're only left with scraps of film. So we did a restoration. It's funny that Schofield in his recent interview calls it a recreation, so they can't even get their story right. And initially, Ray wouldn't say who had done it for them. He's not got the skills, neither has Gary Schofield. So eventually he did put in writing, and I have a copy of it, that a gentleman by the name of Spiros Molaris was involved in, but he says he was a gun for hire. He filmed it, and of course, Gary's admitted the same in his recent interview. We'd already knew about Spiros, but so they changed their story on the run into the making of the movie. So even if it's a minute and a half, that's still a lot of film, Kevin, because there's 24 frames per second. So you've got 90, you've got 90 seconds, minute and a half, times 24. So, that's a lot of frames.
Now, one thing that Gary said on a recent interview regarding the Alien Autopsy is to be able to tell the difference between the reenacted footage and the actual original 1 minute 30 seconds of footage they salvaged from the oxidization of the original film reel. Then just look for the sort of flash frames in the picture to see the edit from the original to the reenacted. I think it's called flash frames.
Yeah, well, basically, when you use 16mm in the old films, you do get a bit of they're called flash frames.
Flash, that's it, yes.
So as the film starts to roll on, you get flash frames, and as it finishes, you get flash frames. It's just, I think a reel of film lasts only a few minutes. But there is a problem with their restoration, because as I mentioned to you, when you talk about the Alien Autopsy film, there are two films. One has been released, the other has never been released. So if you're doing a restoration, Kevin, why would you make two different films? If I hired you to restore the Mona Lisa, the most famous painting in the world, would you say to yourself, you know what? I think I'll make a spare one. And not only will I make a spare one, I'll give a blonde hair and a big cheesy grin. That's how different the two films are.
Okay, so you spent time with Spiros Molaris. What did he have to say about the two different films and why they were?
Well, this is a very interesting part of it. I did a documentary series this year. It's called Alien Autopsy, The Search for Answers. And in that is a rare interview with Santilli. And he is asked about the two different autopsy films. Lo and behold, he's forgotten about them. What do you mean, two films? No, I don't remember showing Philip two films. Well, he didn't just show me. He showed me, my wife, Maurizio Baiata from Italy, Reg Presley, Colin Andrews. So that, and I have them all. Well, I have them all, to tell me their story of what they saw. So he's forgotten about it. So, we go back to 1995. Ray Santilli at that point, the only thing he's shown anybody is this tent footage. And that was made by a chap called Keith Bateman, but that's a whole separate story. But this is the bait. Now, along comes Spiros Molaris. Spiros was indeed a gun for hire, but a camera crew for hire. And he's also a magician. He trained as a mechanic when he was a young man. And he took out every year, you're aware of the Cannes Film Festival in France. But in Cannes, they also have a TV festival. So Spiros takes out a trade directory. So this is not your yellow pages, it's a trade directory. And he looks for some companies that are sort of within a short distance from where he's based. And he sends them a fax. And he said, I'll be in Cannes. I'm filming some stuff there, but I've got some free time on my hands. If you need a crew, we're available. And one of these companies was the Merlin Group. He bumped into Ray Santilli in Cannes. Amongst other things, Santilli tells him about buying this footage from the cameraman, and it's not the greatest. And, so when they get back, Spiros goes to see Santilli at his offices. He shows him the tent footage, which he'd shown, me. And Spiros says, well, that's never seen 16mm film. I can tell just by looking at it, it's been shot on video. And Ray gives, woe is me. I spent a lot of money buying this and it's rubbish, So Spiros thinks. So he's driving home. Now, Spiros has a wicked sense of humor. And you have to bear in mind, he's also a magician, Now, his best friend at the time was a chap called John Humphreys. John is a Royal Academy trained sculptor. And some of his work has overlapped into the film business and television. So he gives him a ring. Yeah, it gives him a ring. It says, you and me could really make some autopsy footage for this guy. So he goes back to Santilli with the idea, me and John, tells him who John is, we can make you this. But according to Spiros, they had a different plan. The plan was, yes, we'll make it. It'll go out on television. And then we'll do the reveal. About 9 months later, we'll go, ta-da, it was us. And this is how we made it. In the hope they get some more business because they'd done such a great job. So off they went. Spiros designed it, worked with John and, some other family members and friends. He even built a set in Spiros's sister's apartment in London because she was having it renovated anyway. So his girlfriend at the time, she also did a lot of the medical research. Spiros even made the white suits. So they filmed one autopsy film, which Santilli had paid for. In fact, the money actually came from his business partner, Volker Spielberg in Germany. But anyway, it came via Santilli. Santilli hadn't met the crew, wasn't involved in the filming or anything like that. And at the end of the day, Spiros's girlfriend, who had done all the medical research, said, you've made a mistake. You've actually made a mistake with the medical. If you release that, they'll know instantly it's a fake, because they don't do that during an autopsy. So Santilli's distraught. They've got no money left. So Spiros says, I'll tell you what, I want to see this out. I'll pay the crew to do another one tomorrow. I'll pay them. There's no money for me. This is out of my own pocket. I want to see this finished. So they've already got the molds for the dummies. So they reset it overnight. When they get back to the apartment the following morning, they think they've been rumbled. They've actually been burgled. And the only thing that was stolen was a fake revolver or a fake gun. And he said, can you imagine the burglar when he opened the door and there's this thing laid on the slab with all its guts cut open and the head open, So they thought, he can't rumble us because he's a burglar. So they take the dummy out of the mold, and there's a problem with that. It's got a big hole in its leg. There's been an air pocket. So they improvise. They put some bones from the butchers in it and some other things. They burn it, to make it look like it's an injury. And they film the autopsy. And this time they get the medical procedure correct. But both films are handed to Ray Santilli. The one everyone has seen is the one with the hole in the leg. That was the one that Spiros paid for himself.
Hence why he may have the rights to it.
Yes.
In a sense, yes.
Go
ahead.
The other one has only ever been seen by a handful of people. Ray has happened to forget about that. It's slipped from his memory. And the reason no one else has seen it is because there is a fault with the medical procedure on it.
And if Ray or Paul owned the rights to the movie, then obviously they would not allowed, or they would have fought, when Spiros filed at the U.S. Congress of Library to state that this is his original material in a sense, and any other places that he's put.
Absolutely, Kevin. If you filmed something and registered the copyright of it, and somebody else comes along and said, "Well, I think I'll stick a copyright in for that," you'd challenge them, wouldn't you?
Especially with how much was made back in the '95 period.
Yes.
On this, which was, we're talking millions of dollars.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
That, and then the movie. Fox paid over $200,000 just for it to be shown on television. Santilli also took a share of the video rights that year. I think it was the biggest selling documentary that year on video.
When did Spiros come forward to what year was that?
Well, we kept chipping away. I worked with a number of colleagues down the years, and in the early 2000s, without checking my files, I can't remember, I got an email from somebody called Simon. And what had happened is I'd written an article for Graham Birdsall's UFO magazine, which was a newsstand publication, and it was about the alien autopsy, and it was on the front cover. This chap Simon had seen it. I don't know, Smiths or whatever. He says, I didn't think there were any interest in this, Philip. And I said, yeah, but it's not as public as you would imagine. It's, we've got the internet now. So swapped a few emails and a few phone numbers. I arranged to meet Simon in Manchester. That was his choosing. We met in a cafe that he chose. And he said, my friend is the guy who made the dummies for Ray Santilli. I said, you've got my attention. But he said he's looking for another payday. He's looking to make a documentary or whatever to spill the beans. And I said, well, the only chap I know who could help in that respect would be Bob Kivier. He's the guy who made the Fox documentary, Alien Autopsy, Fact or Fiction. We'd kept in touch, so I put him in touch. But just before Simon was leaving, either by accident or purpose, he wouldn't tell us who his friend was. He let slip one of the projects he's worked on. So I noted this down, not straight away. I waited while we'd left, then I wrote it down. I'm glad I remembered it. But Channel 4, way back in its heyday, did a very popular TV series called Max Headroom. And the introduction of Max Headroom was for maximum headroom, but it was a prop. This, head and shoulders, and it talked and joked. This sculptor made that dummy, Max Headroom. And with a bit of digging, we found out who he was. And his name was John Humphreys. Now, we'd been looking for a special effects expert for years. I spoke to dozens of them, and they had no idea. But John wasn't a special effects expert he was a sculptor whose work on occasion had overlapped into film and television, So we were looking in the wrong direction. Now, he wouldn't speak to us to begin with, but he was speaking to Bob Kiviat. And then all of a sudden he stopped talking. And, John had an agent, call it what you will, a representative. And he said, your worst nightmares happen. He's actually signed to work on a movie, so he can't no longer speak. And that was the Anton Deck Alien Autopsy movie. But one of the things he did say before he stopped talking to us, he says, well, it's not really me you need to speak to. You need to speak to Spiros. Who the hell is Spiros? That was it. So we got this name Spiros. And what is interesting, we found out who the movie company was. It was QWERTY Films in London. And obviously, I know they won't tell you the plot or this or that. So I just did some general emails with them. And I got to know one of the executives. And I said, what I'm trying to do is when you're allowed to tell me something, maybe put a little article together. She said, fine, Philip. I said, but there might be one thing you can tell me. Who's doing your special effects? She says, we can tell you that. It's John Humphreys. He's doing the dummies for us, and he also did the dummies for Ray Santilli. So, this was in an email as well, so I've got it in writing. So I thought, bingo. So we then but we're thinking, who the hell is this Spiros? So the movie Alien Autopsy comes out. Sometime after, my friend Russell Callahan was running his own small magazine called UFO Data. And Russ had made a little DVD about the alien autopsy. And he got a phone call from a chap. And this chap says, I'm the man who made the alien autopsy film. I'm the man behind it all. So he said, well, it's not me. You should be. And he'd only contacted Russell because he'd seen his little DVD on sale. So Russell says, it's Philip you should be speaking to. So I got his number, rang him, and lo and behold, it was Spiros Molaris. So I'm thinking, how many Spiroses could be, used and linked to the alien autopsy film? Now, as soon as he started talking, I'm ticking off all the points, this is what I've been looking for. So I slowed, because Spiros can talk, I ended the conversation because I wasn't prepared for what was coming. And then I said, I'll ring you back on a specific day and we'll go through, and I'm writing questions out for him. So I did. I rang him back. I had his permission to record it. I've actually got the cassette tapes here, and there they are. There's two of them. This is how long he talked for, and the date on them is the 16th of November, 2007. So that was the second time I spoke to him, and I recorded it. And he told me the whole story. And I said, well, that's great, Spiros. No disrespect, but can you back that up? I could ring you up, but obviously you know a lot about it. So my wife and I went to his house, met his partner that he lived with at the time and her daughter. He showed me his diaries from that time, both, the little handwritten sort of pocket diary. Plus, he used to have a diary on his word processor. He printed that out for me. Showed me faxes from Kodak. And he's they're telling him which edge codes to use to look for on the film for it to be 1947, what type of film was around and would be used. And then he also had a big box, and there was the, the old file folders like you can see over my shoulder. I've got one there, all full of US military vehicles, not tanks, but, I said, well, what do you want them for? He says, well, at one point, Santilli was asked by, I don't know who, what made you believe that the autopsy film was real? He says, I believed it when you could see President Truman in it. You could see Truman so clearly, You could see his lips move. You could read his lips. So what Spiros wanted to do was to actually make a little short piece of film with an actor playing President Truman. And he was going to build a truck, or the end of a truck, in the side. And he was going to pick one of these trucks that had, he even showed me which one it was. I'm going to use not that truck necessarily, but the registration plate off it. Because if you go and check in the archives and you ask about that registration plate, it will have been a US military vehicle. It's not one that's been made up. He said, but we run out of time and money. I didn't get a chance. He says, I'd even picked a disused go-kart stadium where we were going to build this set,
That's crazy. Oh my
gosh. There's all this, and then he pulls out a folder. Spiros is also quite a very good artist in his own right as well. And he'd even painted, not scribbled, painted a storyboard. Santilli made the story up of how he found it. Spiros says, I had nothing to do with the fictional story about the cameraman and where it was low. I had nothing to do with that. But once he got that story from Santilli, he actually did a storyboard so he could visualize it all. And there was, I don't know how many paintings, I didn't count. There was about 20. So there was quite a bit of work went into that as well. And then I went to his house on a second occasion, and he'd actually, with permission, spoken to some of the others involved and recorded the telephone conversation, and they were telling us what had happened and whatever. And, the game over. That was it. So it could support what he was claiming as well. Kevin.
So did you get to listen to some of those phone calls that
yes, I did.
Recorded, and they were from other members of the group just talking about that they had agreed to do that. That movie.
Well, yeah, they were part of the people who have been mentioned within it. The reason I don't want to give any names away is Spiros has literally just finished his own book. And I'm hoping some of the information from these telephone calls might well be in the book. So I want to let him, have the chance to release that in his own right. Yeah.
So that's really interesting what you had to say there, and I just wanted to add this as well, because you said something really important as well, that obviously Ray and Gary, they stick by their story that there was this there was the guy from the army that they met that gave them the canisters, well, not gave Gary the canisters, but gave Ray Santilli the canisters in the end, the canisters of film, right? But all that backstory is false, because Spiros never saw the original 1 minute footage. There was
nobody has. Nobody's seen it. Nobody's ever seen it. See, that's where Santilli falls down. He says our restoration is pretty much like the painting of the Last Supper. He says it's been restored so much there's hardly any of the original paint left on it, and he is correct. I double checked, and I think there's about 20% of the original painting still there. But the difference is, millions of people saw the painting down the decades, down the centuries. Nobody's ever seen Ray Santilli's 16mm film. It's not there anywhere. Plus, there's only one Last Supper painting. There isn't another extra one made. They didn't restore another one. I think, we'll make Jesus a bit happier in the next one. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
We'll put some fish and chips on the table. Right. Never mind this bread.
Right, absolutely. So we were in this interview. We're saying, well, you're saying as well that there is no original 16mm. There is no 1 minute that's been put into the alien autopsy. It doesn't exist. It never did exist. The whole story is made up by Gary and Ray.
Yes, I mean, where Ray Santilli lived at the time, for example, I personally spoke with Kodak in the UK, and I have it in writing as well, but I spoke to them and they say, yes, we will test the film. We won't comment on what it shows on the film, but we'll test it for its age. And not only that, I've spoken to the British Film Institute. This was the guy at Kodak telling me, and they'll offer their services all free of charge. And because they were quite nearby, I mean, they were specialists in looking after old film, Now, Santilli lived so close to them, He could have hand delivered it, Kevin. He could have almost walked there. You know what I mean? But the fact that he didn't speaks volumes. He'll tell you that, you know, Kodak here was shown it, and but Kodak were never shown a piece of film with either an image of the creature on it or any of the debris film. You know, none. Even when you look at the Alien Autopsy Fact or Fiction documentary, there's a gentleman there, you know, interviewed at Kodak, and he's got a piece of the film that he's been given, and he holds it up, and I think it's a set of stairs that are on it. There's no alien on it, you know.
Right. Yeah. Well, and let's just get this right as well. Okay. So Spiros is, him and Ray Santilli. They've met in France. They've got to know each other. They're back in the UK. Flash forward. Then you know, Ray shows Spiros the tent footage. Yep. But how, and I believe that Spiros also, when he watched it initially with Ray, he's like, that's faked. You can tell it's faked. You know, I'm a camera guy. I know that that's not real. But who originally made the tent footage, and what inspired him to want to make the tent footage in the first place? What inspired Ray?
Great story. And it shows that Spiros was right when I tell you this story. So we go back to 1993. Now, Ray used to work with, not for, they were another company, and they were called AK Music. Now, again, you know, I got a tip. I got a gentleman email me, said, I know something about the Alien Autopsy film. He gave me his phone number, and he was called Keith Goodyear. And Keith was an animator for film. And he said, Philip, I went to this company trying to get some work. You know, I'm a freelancer. And they were called AK Music. A stood for Andy, K for Keith. So it's AK Music. He said, and I'm in their office, and the phone goes. And Keith answered it, and he's talking away to a gentleman. And he says the gentleman's name. And the guy he's speaking to is Ray Santilli. So he puts the phone down. So Keith had seen the autopsy film. He says, was that Ray Santilli, the alien autopsy guy? Now, the other guy is called Keith Bateman. He says, yeah, he didn't make the alien autopsy. We did. Get away. So he tells me this story. But what they were actually talking about, because Keith Goodyear says, well, the piece of film he's talking about, I haven't seen. And he's talking about the tent footage. So by the time a couple of years had gone by, and AK Music had closed, but I got in touch with them via Company's House, because at Company's House, Keith had registered his home address. So I got in touch with him, began to speak to him, and cutting a long story short, he says, this is what you, and again, you know, like Spiros, Keith Bateman has got a wicked sense of humor. I mean, he's he said, we'd meet up with Ray and you know, we'd have little brainstorming sessions. I would come up with stupid ideas of what our next project would be. He says, our business was animation. We made, you know, shorts. We were hired. We'd do karaoke. One of the first companies in the UK to do karaoke videos. We only worked on video, not film. All our stuff was video. And Ray's there one day, and he says, I even believe Ray had been to Roswell at some point. And he just said, come out with it. He said, wouldn't it be great if we had some Roswell footage? And it just so happens one of Keith Bateman's employees was a chap called Philip Jarman. And Philip was there, and he has a book about UFOs, and there's pages in it about Roswell. So Santilli goes home. Keith gets the light bulb moment, gets some of his colleagues, and they drive to a farm in Bedfordshire. One of his other colleagues, a chap called Andy, is in a wheelchair. He said, we've no idea where we're going or what we're going to do. He turns up at this farm. Keith has one of the old polystyrene heads that you put a wig on, but he's made big black eyes on it. And he got his son to lie on this door on some trestles and put the head at one end, covered it in an old blanket, got one of the other employees, put a white coat on, went and bought some giblets from the butcher, and the butcher came, and there you go. There's the tent footage. They film it. Originally, it was filmed in color. The farmer occasionally walks in front of the camera. He's got his back to you the whole time. So it runs for about, I don't know, 8 or 10 minutes. It's now in black and white. The copy I have is black. So what we did is we took it back to the base. We ran it through the computer. We put some scratches on it. We changed it from color to black and white. And he said, I sent it to Ray Santilli. And he says, how about that for some Roswell footage? He says, it's rubbish. It's too dark. You can't see much. Get me a quote for some good stuff. Don't make me one. Get me a quote. So Keith said he phoned, I believe, Pinewood Studios. And he's trying to explain to them, you know, obviously he's not a special effects guy, and they're asking him questions. And I think he comes back with a budget of £45,000. And he tells Santilli, he says, that's too much, forget it. You know, that's ridiculous. But Ray's got the tent footage. And, you know, his little light bulb has come on. And that's the first piece of film he ever showed anyone. Well, that was the bait. So when he started talking to me, when he changed from just making a UFO documentary to I've got the Roswell film, what he actually had at that point was only the tent footage. And to be honest with you, Kevin, when I first saw it, that was the kind of thing I was expecting you to see. Bit grainy, bit dark, you know. The men didn't have anything covering their faces, so maybe you could enhance it, maybe you couldn't. You know, you could see the creature's head and the big black eyes, and it was poor quality. And I thought, well, you know, I think that's pretty good.
Yeah, and many other people did as well. And
yeah. Now Keith Bateman didn't know that Santilli was using that as bait. Didn't know that the 8th autopsy film was being made. Had no idea. He was kept completely out of the loop. So Keith decided he was going to use it. He was going to pass the tent footage off as the genuine article. And he'll tell you this himself. Nobody has to believe me. Keith's around. They were booked in on, I think it was one of the daytime television shows. And Keith was going to show this and say, I've got this. Ray Santilli somehow found out. He was on a family holiday in Florida. He got the next flight home, went to Keith's office, blazing mad, because he was now got the alien autopsy film made and he's selling it. And he was so mad, he kicked the table and broke his toe. And he said to Keith, how much does it take for you not to show it? And Keith gave him a figure just off the top of his head. He's told me what it was. And a courier delivered that amount of money later that day in cash. So there you go.
Okay.
And I've interviewed Keith. I've interviewed his employees who were there at the time. I spoke to Philip Yarman, you know, and they said, yeah, you know, so it's exactly as that. That's so it's all there. For
your own peace of mind, you got that verified. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So, but going back to Spiros, I mean, how do you know 100% he's telling the truth, that he never actually did get to see any footage that Ray may have had? I'm just, you know, trying to go from that perspective of, well, let's look at both sides. You know, I mean, you must have thought about this. You know, I mean, was there? I mean, how do you know for 100% there was no footage that?
Well, was... I'll give you an example. When the story got out, a chap by the name of Bob Shell tried to get himself involved. Bob was a nice enough guy, although he's in prison at the moment. But Bob was the editor of a magazine in America called Shutterbug. It was a photographic magazine. You know, Bob was an expert in film and photography. No past history in UFO research. So this was Bob's entry into it, if you like. And he came to the UK to meet Santilli and to be shown the film. Now, an old trick that all musicians use is misdirection. You know, I wave this hand, but it's the other hand that's doing the business. So they got a canister of film out that had already been shot. So this was the autopsy film on 16mm. Okay, but they spliced at the beginning of it a piece of old film that they bought on the market. And that piece of old film had the edge code on. The edge code matched 1947. But obviously, if you held it up like that, you'd be able to see what it was spliced together. All Spiros did. The old art of misdirection. put his finger and his thumb over the splice, reeled the film out, and Bob's looking at the images on the film. 16mm film, there's the creature, you know, but it was contemporary 16mm film, you know. So why would you show him contemporary 16mm film if you had the real McCoy? You know, why risk being uncovered? If you'd have said, let me handle it, and he, you know, for some else, Spiros didn't have his fingers over the splice correctly or whatever. And that fooled Bob. You know, he was convinced that he'd seen the genuine article. Bear in mind, none of this film is damaged, of course. It's all perfect, you know. So you go on to Santilli's story later on that it were all stripping off and whatever. It's in perfect condition.
Okay, but obviously, you know, if you were to sit with Gary Shoefield right now, and I mean, I've seen pictures of you with Gary and Ray, not that many years ago. I mean, you all seem that you. I mean, are you talking, you guys, right now at all in any sense, or would you?
I communicated with Santilli. I think it was last year, and like I said, he appeared on the documentary series I've just made, which amazed me, but he did. So there's, you know, I haven't spoken to him since.
Okay, we'll link that documentary series. It's in the description below. The URL for that is as well. But obviously, Gary Shoefield has, has and will appear on future shows probably regarding this, and he sticks by his story. So, you know, I mean, why has he got to keep that lie going? Do you think, if it is a lie?
Well, you know, I think technically, you know, bearing in mind him and Ray are not just business partners, they are best friends. You know, they've been best buddies, and that's one of the few things that comes across as being accurate in the Ant and Dec film. They grew up together, you know, so they're good friends as well. But I think technically, and I may be wrong, I'm not a lawyer, but I have asked this question. Technically, when Ray was selling the film to the various television companies, it may have been fraud because he was telling him it was the genuine article. When of course it's not. If it's a fake, then technically it could be linked as fraud. Now you would have to, you know, take him to court for fraud. It's not something, you know, the police are going to come along and arrest him. So, you know, he would be dropping his friend in it. But, you know, like I said, they can't get their stories accurate. They also admit faking the cameraman's interview. We know that the tent footage is faked by Keith Bateman. Remember this as well, Kevin. When Santilli sold his package of film to Fox, he sold them the tent footage, the one autopsy film and the debris film. He already knew that Keith Bateman had used, you know, had made the tent footage. Why would he include a piece of fake footage if the other stuff is real? You know, it doesn't make any sense. It was only when Santilli employed a guy called Chris Carey. Chris came on board and he tried to calm things down because it was snowballing, you know, taking on a life of its own. And it was not long after that they were making the Alien Autopsy Fact or Fiction show, and Ray asked them to not use the tent footage, and they went bananas. But he knew it was fake. But the reason for it is because you could see the people's faces on it.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And with the debris footage, who came forward to admit that they had faked that as well?
Well, that's Spiros. And again, if you look at the I-beams, you might have guessed by Spiros's name. He's of Greek descent. So he speaks and he's born in the UK, but his parents, I believe, are from Greece. But he speaks and reads and writes the language. The letters on the I-beams are Greek, with a little bit of tweaking on them, but they are actually Greek. You know, and the reason I know he can read and write and speak Greek is because a colleague of mine from Greece has spoken to him in their native tongue.
Right. Okay. Interesting. And has that footage ever surfaced again? The wreckage footage?
Well, it's online. You know, it's there for everyone to see. What is interesting, and a lot of people haven't seen this, when on the run to the Alien Autopsy movie coming out, Gary and Ray did a documentary, with Sky. It's with Eamon Holmes as the guy. It's called Eamon Investigates. He's never done any more. It's just that one. And they actually opened the boot of their car, and there is all the molds for the fake debris film. And even Ray admits, he says, they asked him about it, and he just said, well, that was artistic license. In other words, they made it up. They faked it. So there's another one ticked. So when you talk about the Alien Autopsy film, Kevin, you're talking about 5 different pieces of film.
Yeah, and come on, you've also been in this field for a long time, and you've met many people that have said they've had these experiences where they've not, and as soon as you get just a little bit of red flag from some people previously, that's kind of written it off for you. And there's so many red flags here in this particular case. Do you know what I mean?
So you've got 3 out of 5 films here being admitted to being faked.
Right.
How many more do you need?
Well, that's my point. And with Spiros, he's I think, has he been working recently more on holographic technology, not technology, but holographic reproduction?
No, that's Gary Shoefield. That's Gary Shoefield. Yes. That's his line of business now.
That was what I was going to. That's Gary's, but also Spiros has also talked about on a podcast recently as working in that type of field as well.
I've not heard that, so I can't comment. But I know he works with a lot of artists, and they do a lot of artwork. And so I think if it's anything, it may be in that field. Right, again, before the lockdown, he was assisting a number of artists to get put on shows, put on displays, because he's quite a good artist himself.
He talked about on this podcast that he was going to possibly do a holographic recreation of the autopsy as well, the body.
Well, why not? That'd be great.
Yeah,
but I don't know anything about that. That's not a conversation I ever had.
No. Well, I know that obviously Gary, as you know, is working in LA doing that. Obviously, when this came out as well, what was the reaction from the intelligence services, do you think, on this? Do you think that what they did, they stepped on something that had really happened, yet that obviously it was all faked by them, but this event did really happen? What's your feelings on that?
Well, how would we ever know? The intelligence services are not going to tell me.
But wasn't there a screening at the Pentagon?
No. Santilli claimed to have screened the film with a number of sources, and again, could never back it up with any supporting evidence. He claimed to have shown it for a number of religious leaders here in the UK. But you ask him who they were and where it was. He also claimed it was sent to a particular laboratory to be transferred. When that was contacted, they'd never heard of it. So these were the things that Ray would just make up. To when things got a bit hairy, like Truman. Nobody'd seen Truman, and when you check the late Stanton Friedman, for example, went to the Truman Library and tracked where Truman's diary was, where he was at that time, and it was nowhere near Roswell. It wasn't within a short hop and a skip and a jump, so he could nip in there and nip out unnoticed. So that fell by the wayside. And of course, Truman's not on the film anywhere. But Ray then says, that was a bit of the film that disintegrated. But you see, again, I've forgotten the name of it, but the type of film that would have disintegrated and melted wasn't used in 1947. It was used prior to that. They changed it simply because of that. The old film that they used in the silent movies and whatever, when you stored it, it could literally combust, but then they changed the make of film. So by 1947, they weren't using that type of film. And isn't it amazing? Just think about this, Kevin. The cameraman's kept this stuff in his basement or whatever for 50 years. And it's perfect because races, I fly to his house, in Florida, and we set up a projector and he shows me on the wall. It's perfect. But in the 18 months thereafter, it all falls to pieces. Why would that happen? It doesn't make any sense. And there were supposedly 22 reels of film. Santilli only saw one, and plus that, his cameraman should be long since dead now. He was in his 80s then. So it'd be 100 plus now if he was still alive. So why not release his details now? We could.
Well, that's true, isn't it? Yes.
but then Santilli also gave out a background to who his cameraman was. And he said it worked on a couple of projects. One, of course, which was the first filming of the atomic bomb. Well, there was only a limited number of people allowed to film the first explosion of the atomic bomb simply because of the secrecy. And all those people are now known, and it's not one of Santilli's cameramen. So Santilli said, but my cameraman filmed it from the air. When you check the archives, there was no film of it from the air. It wasn't photographed from the air, And he said he worked on something else, and all the people through that are known as well. And he kept checking. So he said, like we talked about the piece of Elvis footage he bought. He actually bought it from a DJ called Bill Randall. It wasn't, a long lost piece of Elvis film. It was a vintage piece, but it was well known about it. And Ray bought it from Bill Randall. Bill Randall was tracked down by a television company in France who had Santilli live on screen when they dropped him with that. And he just says, oh, yeah.
And okay, so Gary Shewfield will say that he doesn't remember the name of the camera guy, and even if he did, he wouldn't publicly mention the name.
It's amazing how much he's forgotten. Well, the most important piece of film in the history of mankind, and he's forgotten pretty much everything about it.
I'm okay with people forgetting some things. It does happen, right? I mean, let's just be honest. If I was to rename some of my old classmates, I was thinking about this the other day. I was like, shit, I actually can't remember some of their names. I actually can't, right? But I do know some of their names, right? But when it comes to this, you'd have thought this pinnacle part of his life, right? He would have been able to remember, but he's also saying even if he did, he can't say. But like you say, this guy would have been dead by now. What is the, is there implications on his remaining family? Is that why you don't want to do it? Or
again, Ray's story of why it was also had to be a cash transaction was that the guy was worried about the Inland Revenue, or the IRS as they call it in America, I believe. Well, again, you could go sell your car for cash. It's got nothing to do with the Inland Revenue. You sell your microphone there. I'll buy your microphone from cash off you if you like.
Nothing's going to get back to the IRS. If it's done on the side. That's not strong enough excuse. He was going to use the money the camera guy was for his daughter's wedding or something. That's what it was going to be for.
Well, again, Ray will tell you it's a granddaughter, and Gary Shewfield will tell you it's the daughter.
But how can Gary sit there? How can Gary sit there and be comfortable to want to tell that lie unless it's comfortable enough because you still got the remnants of some of that millions in an account somewhere. Maybe you would be comfortable then. I don't know.
Absolutely. I mean, he admits on his recent interview that the cameraman's interview was a fake. He gives a reason for it, and he laughs at it. He thinks he's funny.
What do you think is the implications of it being faked? And do you think it was a good thing that what they did because at least it gave some attention to a potential case that would have been a really important case back in the day, still is now, if Roswell really did happen? You speak to someone like Don Schmidt, there is evidence for all the years that he's put into it that Roswell really did happen. But what do you think there? Yeah.
Well, no, I mean, I got criticism, and rightly so. But my reply has been, if you go back to 1995, when this film came out, it was the biggest story that's probably ever been released in UFO research. And it raised the interest in both the Roswell case and UFOs in general enormously. It was on everyone's lips. And today, there's examples of that. This alien autopsy film is firmly implanted in popular culture. It made it onto Seinfeld, The Simpsons, The X-Files. You can buy it, crops up in museums in the most unlikely of places. You can buy an alien autopsy Halloween cake, So it was that big. And I remember a colleague here in the UK complaining to me about it. And I won't mention her name. And I said, well, I happen to know that you had a book out at the same time of the release of the alien autopsy film. And it sold that many copies that your publisher had to order a reprint. You know, the book had nothing to do with Roswell or this film or anything. It was just a UFO book, but even you benefited out of it, you know. So don't come complaining to me. That's the effect it had on the subject, and it went around the world, you know. And not only that, like I say, it had its critics, and rightfully so. But at the end of the day, it was a known UFO researcher, i.e., me, that finally exposed it. It wasn't Philip Klass, who was the arch debunker of his day. It wasn't anyone from the Skeptic Society. They labeled it a hoax, but they couldn't prove it, you know. But it was a UFO researcher that diligently stuck at it and eventually proved it to be a fake, you know. Whereas I've worked on other cases, admittedly not as long, but I've stuck at it and I found more evidence to support it. And that's just the way, you know, the way it went. On this occasion, it was a huge hoax. You know, I honestly believed, Kevin, that once it went out on television, bearing in mind it was seen by millions around the world, I thought we'll have all the answers we need in no time. You know, somebody will come forward and say, that was shot in my studio, or I supplied the props, or, you know, I'm one of the actors in it, or whatever. Or my granddad told me about that. I think that's the type of thing my granddad was involved in. It's real. But none of that happened. It was just like, you know, the old tumbleweed effect you sometimes see on the movie. It was like that for an awful long time. So I had no choice. I either just went with the flow, or I just stuck at it. And I stuck at it.
No, good on you, Philip, for sticking at it. And your book, Roswell Alien Autopsy, The Truth Behind the Film That Shocked the World, the revised edition, is a good example to those wanting to fact-check other people on how to go about that and to sort of present such research using a book format.
Well, I think what you can do with you don't have to buy my book, you know, although I'd like you to, you know, but my book is a template, if you think about it, of how such a hoax was committed. And I'd hoped that, you know, we'd learn our lesson. But it's only a few years back, we then had Roswell again involved in a fake. And it was the Roswell slides fiasco with Jaime Maussan down in Mexico. And when you look at the guy who was involved in it behind the scenes, the man who was orchestrating this was a chap called Adam Dew. And there was a rare interview that he gave to camera. And he even said on this little interview, "I'm not Ray Santilli." But when you look at what he did, it's almost the same template that Ray Santilli had used. So I'm sorry, Mr. Dew, but you may not be Santilli, but you certainly copied his ideas.
Do you think you'd ever have, or if you ever had the chance of a sort of, you know, a conference, a taped sort of conference with Ray and Gary, do you think that they would do it? And also, do you think you'd find it difficult to sort of do that type of?
No, I'd love to do it, but I don't think they'd ever do it. I'll give you an example. You know the Jeremy Kyle show that we used to have on TV here.
Yes.
I actually got in touch with them, the producer, and I think I remember his name. And I said, "How would you like something entirely unique but still fits with your show?" So instead of a couple arguing whether their child was theirs or not, we'd have Spiros on one side and we'd have Ray Santilli on the other, putting their arguments across whether it was real or not. They'd both take polygraphs, and both would we thought this is a great idea. But then I put a caveat in. I said, what you will have to do, Ray, so we don't have a DNA test, because I'm not talking about whether it's your child or not, but you have to provide 2 frames of film that are given to the film company, and they decide where the film is tested. So at the end, you know, the reveal is not whether DNA, whether the child is yours or not, but whether it's you know. And all of a sudden, he lost interest when that was mentioned. He was okay with having a polygraph, you know, but when it comes to testing the film, bear in mind, you know, right from the day one, Ray Santilli said, this is just a commercial exercise. I want to make money from it. So from a commercial point of view, it would make sense to have that stamp of authenticity. It's like, was it last year or the year before? There was a family that had this painting in their house for decades, and they believed it was a lost Da Vinci, and they kept saying no, no, no. Oh, actually, it is, and it was worth zillions.
Yeah. What is the attraction in this field, do you think, of so much psychopathic misinformation, disinformation, so-called whistleblowers? Because there isn't that, with the advent of YouTube, there are so many platforms in the UFO community that give voices to people who are provable that they're not who they are. It's okay to have an interview with one person, tell their story, debate them a little bit, and okay, that's their story, But if you're going to repeatedly have that person back on, and you're the main support for that person, and you're not doing your due diligence, or and you don't want to see the evidence because that's state-sponsored evidence, crazy cackoo nonsense, right?
Yeah.
But that's where we've gone a bit. That's where we are.
Absolutely. I mean, there are those that still believe that the Alien Autopsy film is real, and that Spiros is some kind of mysterious man in black, although he does wear black sometimes, and a black hat, and a colleague who I was out in Roswell with in 2007 has just called him exactly that. You're some kind of intelligence officer. And so Spiros says, well, that's great. Which bank account does my salary go in? Because it's not going in mine, But it's, I've tried, and this is, you have to remember, Spiros knew nothing about the UFO societies or culture. And he thought, I'll tell everyone my story, and I'll show them my information, and they'll believe, they'll see it's a fake. And he can't get his head around why some of them don't believe him and make counter accusations against him. I said, well, to them, you're the bogeyman. They've invested. They've got a belief system. You're the heretic. I says, it'd be like going up to the Pope and saying, I've got evidence that that Jesus never existed. It casts you out. So I no disrespect to anyone who is of a religious nature, of course, but they have a belief system, and you're challenging their very core, the core of their beliefs, and their belief is that this film is real.
And absolutely, thank you for that. And let's just state this as well, that Spiros, he never received any money. The money that Gary and Ray made on the distribution of this throughout the world, he never received anything.
No. I mean, what Spiros has told me, he said, I continued to work for myself, and I did jobs for Ray. And occasionally I would drop in and say, Ray, how's things going? Oh, and Ray would say, I haven't made my money back yet. And he said, fair enough. And then he'd just carry on. He had a life to lead. And and he said he'd signed a non-disclosure agreement so they wouldn't talk about it in public until they were all happy to do so. And he said, but then when the Anton Deck film came, and they were then admitting that the film was kind of not real, although they were adding the restoration bit. Spiros said, as far as I was concerned, the non-disclosure agreement was then null and void. And he decided to speak out. And it was only then, and some people might say, well, he must be naive, but it was only then that Spiros actually saw where this film had gone and what had happened. He couldn't believe it. And of course, how much money had been made out of it, because that was not their original intention, and he was amazed. And he never made a penny out of it. He still doesn't want to, money for stuff, although he's a businessman. If you want to pay him to do an interview, that's fine, but his main concern is he wants recognition for what he believes is the greatest illusion ever committed, because he is an illusionist, he's a magician, and that's what he looks upon. This was a magic trick.
Yeah, I mean, being myself based over here right now, I do want to go to LA and meet Gary. I would like to do that, and if I can get anything set up for a call with yourself as well, to do something, an interview-wise, that would be very interesting. I doubt he would do it, but I'm over here, so I do plan to go to LA at some point. I've been there not too long ago, and yeah, that would be great, wouldn't it, to get you and him on?
Yeah, and what Spiros told me, he said, for example, if I do a magic trick and then I show you how it's done, you'll believe me. I'll show you. He said, I'm not allowed to do that because I'm part of the magic circle. But let's assume, but he said, here I am. I've done this illusion that we call the alien autopsy film, and I'm showing you how I did it. You don't believe me.
Yeah, I know, right? Yeah. Did this make you a bit more hardened to other cases that you had investigated in the past and that you've been doing in the present now? Have you been?
Absolutely, Kevin. I mean, I was speaking to a colleague recently, and when it comes to any type of film or photographs, we automatically think fake. We used to give them the benefit of the doubt in the past. We'd keep an open mind about it, but like you've mentioned, there is so much now you can do with your home computer or whatever. I mean, I believe there was an app you could get for your phone where you could make your own UFO photo on an app. So and I have another colleague of mine who says I will not accept any film or photograph, none whatsoever. I don't care who they're from. I won't touch them with a barge pole, and that's it.
Okay.
And I understand that.
How much? Because obviously you give your sort of tick box to some cases. How difficult is that for you to sort of certify that there's something really here? How much research do you put into? Because obviously there's a number of big cases that you've been working with recently.
Well, you have to remember when we're talking about film or photographs, that's only as good as the background data. It's not proof positive. You could tell me about what you observed, say yesterday, and you just don't happen to have a photograph of it. You didn't have your phone or a camera. So you must treat it the same. The film or the photograph is also, almost incidental now. Whereas in the past, before the advent of digital technology, you put greater faith in film, even though we knew it could be fake, but it was more difficult to do a fake in those days. So you put a bit more credence on it, and you would use the film to perhaps support the sighting or whatever. Whereas now you've got to be really critical. You really have, with all things really.
So when you've put your name to something like the UFO case of Calvin Parker, you've made sure, you've done a lot of investigation into that case before working with it, right?
Well, yeah, I've worked with Calvin Parker, and it was the Pascagoula incident that happened on October the 11th, 1973. Calvin was almost 19 at the time, and he was with his friend Charlie Hickson, who was 42. And they went fishing on the Pascagoula River and had a close encounter. Calvin kind of hid away from it whilst Charlie went public. Charlie's long since dead. And it was something I read about in the 1980s, and it always stuck with me. So when I started Flying Disc Press, I managed to get the rights to republish Charlie Hickson's book that he wrote with a chap called William Mendez in 1983. And it's called UFO Contact at Pascagoula. You could buy a hard copy of it, secondhand, but they wanted, $100 for it. I thought, that's not right. So, and I thought Calvin was still alive. And I thought, what I'd like to do is perhaps get an interview with him just to stick in the back of the book, just bring it up to date a bit. Took me a few months to find him, but I finally did, and I spoke to him. And it was very pleasant, But I could see I was getting the brush off, politely. But I wasn't after anything, just an interview. So I explained to him who I was. Unbeknown to me, his wife, Wayannette, and him had, not long before I contacted him, they'd been to a friend's funeral. And Calvin signed something on the way out of the church. I don't know if it was a book of condolence or whatever. And those following behind then saw his name as like wink, wink, nudge, nudge, So Wayne said, why the hell don't you write a book? So he, just to pacify the wife, he said, yeah, I will do. And then along came me. And between us, we suggested a book, and he said, okay, let's go for it. And he wanted to tell his full story, which he'd never told before, for the first time. So we did. I knew there were other witnesses involved because in Charlie Hickson's book, there was some eyewitnesses featured in there. And Calvin, they're not too different in age. I left school in 1974. There's only 3 or 4 years between us. So I thought, if I'm still here, others from that period could still be around. So cutting a long story short, Calvin did some local TV, some of which somebody put it on YouTube. And a young lady left a comment and she said, my mum and dad were on the opposite side of the river that night and they saw the UFO. And I'm thinking, what? So I got in touch with her. She gave me her mum and dad's details. They were a Mr. and Mrs. Blair. They now live down in Alabama, but it's not far. And yes, Mrs. Blair and Mr. Blair said he was in the fishing industry. So he was on the other side. It's a huge river, and they were waiting for a boat coming in and it was a bit late. Now, Calvin and Charlie, the first thing they saw was the blue lights. And Mrs. Blair said, I could see this blue light over the other side of the river. Looked like it was looking for something or it was lost. Mr. Blair said, yeah, I saw it. But then she says, our little boat came in and they're walking up the pier and there's a huge splash in the water next to me. And she said, I looked down and there's a grey man in the water. And he went under the water. I never saw him come up. Mr. Blair later on, he also told us the same story. And then we had others step forward. Another gentleman on the other side of the river that night, he was working in the shipyard. And he said, I got into my cab, Philip. It's about 12 feet off the floor. He said, I could see it. He said, I've never seen anything like it in my life. And he's a Mr. Lewis Lee. And then others, slowly but surely, stepped forward independently. So there you have it.
And so lots of independent witnesses coming together there to verify that this was, a real case. And I know that that he's doing some amazing stuff right now, and I know you are with him as well. With that, so is it going to become a movie or?
Well, we hope so. Calvin himself has signed, potentially. He has signed up with a producer who has also written the screenplay, some of which I've been able to read. I'm not involved. This is between him and Calvin, but they keep me in the loop because Calvin and I have become good friends. And I've read part of the screenplay, and it is I'm not just saying this, it is very, very good indeed. It really is. And I think if it makes it to either the big screen or the small screen, I think it would be well received by lots of different aspects of the community, both UFOs, the sci-fi community would love it as well. There's a romance through it because Calvin goes through all this with his wife Waynette from day one. So there's a bit of everything in it, and it is really good. And it's very, very accurate because Calvin used to say, well, he still does, he says, that damn producer's been on the phone to me for 2 hours again tonight,
Yeah. Oh,
and he just laughed.
Yeah.
I can't do the southern Mississippi accent. I wish I could.
It's a certain type of accent that is. Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
And obviously that's one book. And I mean, look, we're obviously linking your website below as well. But obviously, your website just for the podcast is.
Yeah, it's just flyingdiscpress.com. Okay. That's disc with a K. Flyingdiscpress.com.
And one of your other books that you've republished book as well, a bit of a classic as well, was Without Consent, Close Encounters of the Fourth Kind, and that's just come out recently as well.
Yes.
Yeah, and there's all sorts of different information in there as well, sort of from vintage cases to sort of abduction cases.
It's all about abduction and missing time cases from the UK only, and I've done a revised edition, so I've brought it right up to date. So it's because we forget, Kevin, new people are joining the subject all the time. That book is no longer available, so you do a revised edition, and it's there for a whole new breed of UFO researchers if they want it.
Yes, absolutely. And what is it, do you think, just on a final note here, that sort of has kept you in doing this type of research? What is it that really, sparks your interest in the subject?
Well, I remember when I first started, I mean, talk about green around the gills. I mean, I really was. But I thought to myself, I joined a local UFO group, the Yorkshire UFO Society, which was founded by Graham and Mark Birdsall. And I thought, I'll ask a few questions, I'll write a few letters, I'll read a few more books, and I'll have all, no time at all. I'll have all the information I want. And here I am, 40 plus years later, still writing those letters, still asking those questions, and still reading those books. Never in 1,000 years. When I went to that first meeting, did I think I'd still be involved to the extent I am all these years later? Before that, my main interests were rock music, enjoying myself and young ladies, and football, But once the UFO got into your veins, that was it. There's no way to get it out, Kevin.
Yeah, absolutely. And well, thank you for sharing that. And obviously, this has been about the alien autopsy, and I just wanted to sort of mention some of the other work that you've done there as well. But if there was any sort of final message on the alien autopsy, or because you have no ill will towards any of the participants involved in that, do you? In a sense, do you know what I mean? But what would be your sort of parting message on this?
What I would say is, if there's anyone out there and they come across an alien autopsy film, is please don't contact me. I've done mine. Beware. But it was a great experience because it took me to places that I'd never been before. I learned a huge amount from it. Pretty much every UFO case that you have, even if it's, the 1015 to Malaga that somebody's reported, I think from just about every one of them, you can learn something, and I learned more about the subject from my work on the alien autopsy film than I perhaps did anything else. So it has served me well in that respect, and it opened up a lot of doors for me as well, which would never have been opened otherwise.
No, and I suppose as well, one thing, the word that keeps coming in my mind is discernment. It's not just believing it because someone else says it. You've got to really think sometimes. I know we don't always have the chance when we hear a story to think, well, let me just spend 10 years and research that, right? But at the same time, there is always two sides to a story, and as long as it's presented fairly, and the evidence shows that it's pointing in that direction, that's fair enough. But when there's no discernment applied, I think that goes for everything. But you've got to not take it with a pinch of salt when you get to something like this, but you've got to think about it logically as well. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, follow the breadcrumbs. Follow the evidence. That's why some people keep saying, well, what do you think UFOs may be, Philip? What are they? Well, I don't really have a fixed opinion. Because what tends to happen when you have a fixed opinion, you don't realize you're doing it, but you will cherry pick the information that will support your ideas and your theories. So if you don't have one, then, the blinkers are literally off, and you can say, well, I will just follow the evidence, and the evidence will tell me what this is. And if it's a fake, it's a fake. And you may have to give updates if it's a long running investigation. This is where I am so far. Which is what I did with the alien autopsy film. I used to give updates. This is what we've learned recently. I used to call it shaking the alien autopsy tree. We'd shake the tree and see what fell out of it now and again, So that's the same with any case. Like the people who've been involved in Roswell, how many years they've been investigating that, And even Calvin Parker has a link to the Roswell case, but that's another story. But it's, you just keep at it.
Well, okay, then. Do you think the Roswell case really happened?
I've no doubt that something crashed at Roswell. Even the Air Force will admit that, but they say it's Project Mogul. What is interesting, Kevin, and not a lot of people have noticed this, that the Air Force always admitted it was a balloon, weather balloon, Project Mogul. It was only after the alien autopsy film was released that they admitted that bodies were related to the to the Roswell case, but these were the anthropomorphic dummies that they used for parachute testing. But they didn't use them until the 1950s, so it has nothing to do with Roswell. But they're claiming people mistook these wooden dummies they used to use for aliens. But they only admitted that after the alien autopsy film went around the world.
Wouldn't it, isn't that amazing that maybe by faking something like this, it actually just prodded the great giant in a sense to think, well, we better put something out. Do you know what I mean? Because maybe they thought, well, did he see something? Did he see recreation?
If it was balloons, be it just a weather balloon or Project Mogul, there was no bodies associated with it. But of course, there's a band of witnesses who say, well, I saw bodies. So they had to come up with a reason why there may have been bodies, and they came up with these wooden dummies, but they weren't used until the 1950s. But they only admitted that after the alien autopsy film went around the world. It may just be a coincidence, but I'm not so sure.
Well, maybe even if they faked the alien autopsy, which they have, as far as I'm concerned, with your research, the film, that actually they have played a part in disclosure. To even do what it wouldn't have happened. Even them admitting that there was bodies there, had something like this not come out, and so there's always an upside to anything, isn't there? There's always a positive somewhere.
And when I met Spiros Molaris, I told him, I said, Spiros, I tell you now, this film's never going to go away. And he said, don't be so daft. I'll tell him my story. I'll show him my evidence. That'll be the end of it. He now admits that I'm right. It's never going to die. It will always be there. Yeah. It will haunt me. It will haunt me.
Well, Philip, I just want to say, thank you for coming on right now. I really appreciate you giving us an hour and a half or more of your time. So, and thank you for, sort of paving the way to show other people, that put in, how to, just keep chipping away at the facts. And if you know that underlying there's something more there, that it always pays off, and it is rewarding because, look, as you say, what it's done for you. So thank you very much.
And it can be very positive as well. If you look what we've encountered with Calvin Parker's case, although it happened in 1973, the amount of evidence we've uncovered since then has been amazing.
Well, Philip Mantle, just thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure.